Good morning, Reverend Lisa. Good morning, LA Third, as you celebrate 89 years of spiritual truth. Reverend Lisa was right. I was really feeling Dexter's song this morning. Uh, it's our season. Because sometimes, in the ministry, you never know what's going to happen. And sometimes things kind of pile in on you. And you look around and you say, wow, I got a lot to do. And I've been planning all this past week, my 50-year high school class reunion. And then my daughter decided she was going to have her 40th birthday party on the same day. And then one of my dearest friends made his transition, and they asked me to do his service this coming Tuesday. So this week has just been full. And I almost let it get to me. And then I realized that it's just my season. It's my time to be blessed and blessed other people. And that's why I'm so glad I'm here with my LA Third church family today as we culminate this month-long celebration of 89 years of service to the spiritual community. And we call it LA Third Church. Reverend Lisa and Dr. Ronnie have chronicled their journey and the tutelage in this wonderful experience of enlightenment that we have at LA Third. I was thinking back and I couldn't remember the year that I entered our sanctuary for the first time, but I do remember the first time I heard Dr. Ronnie speak. It was at Charlie Moorhead's mom's homegoing. And I realized that day that he really had something special. And whatever it was, I wanted some of it. However, when I came to LA Third to hear him speak, I heard Reverend Lisa, and the rest is history. So after getting an opportunity to speak several times, in June of 2008, Dr. Ronnie officially brought me into the ministerial staff, and shortly thereafter asked me to take the reins of Parkside EDC. And I want our church family to know that we really and truly appreciate all of the support that you've given Parkside over the years. During this pandemic season, we actually had some of our best fundraising without even having events. That's how blessed we've been. We've been able to continue to give away over $20,000 in scholarships every year. We're still giving our students and their families financial literacy training. And we've taken our financial literacy a step further and formed a partnership with the Urban League. We call it BWARP, Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program, where we're having seminars on helping you learn how to build and sustain and pass on that legacy wealth. As Reverend Lisa pointed out, it was 10 years ago when we were given the opportunity to assist her and Reverend Paul in ministering to this congregation. You all know that I'm into the spiritual significance of numbers. You see, the study of biblical numeric symbols reveal one or more of the significant meanings that these numbers represent. So I want you to check this out. The East Side Church that became LA Third Church of Religious Science, now Spiritual Living, opened its doors in 1932. Well, the number 19 represents faith, and the number 32 symbolizes a covenant that's being born. And 1932 was our year of initiation. And then there's the number 45, which represents preservation. It was 1945 that the Church of Religious Science had the faith to preserve our charter. The idea of LA Third was preserved in 1945. The number 8 represents new birth, being reborn. The number 6 represents overcoming challenges. It was 1986 when Dr. Ronnie stepped out on faith and revitalized LA Third Church. And then there's the number 20, which represents redemption. And the number 11 which represents sound judgment. It was 2011 when Dr. Ronnie saw the redeeming qualities of the ministers that he had tutored, and he had the sound judgment to bring forth a spiritual trilogy. Reverend Lisa, Reverend Paul, and Reverend Jerrold united in faith to continue the legacy of this 89-year-old beacon of love, wisdom, and spiritual freedom. No wonder our Reverend Lisa chose chapter 10, faith. No wonder she referred to the Psalms, the reflection of love, wisdom, and freedom to complement this celebrating of the divine. She wanted us to celebrate the divine, the godlike quality that we possess within us. You see, we're celebrating this month the all-knowing, absolute, unlimited expression of God. During this, our 89th anniversary, we're focusing on an ever-present, all-wise, unconditionally loving, and all-powerful spirit. You see, we celebrate today our ability to access that all that God is, all it does, and what it can and what it is becoming. You see, every time we unite with this creative law that brings things into manifestation, we realize just how blessed we truly are. But this party that we're having, this celebration, can't continue. The spiritual experience we desire can't take place without faith. And as we review chapter 10 of our Science of Mind text, Ernest Holmes tells us, he says, those who have great faith have great power. Everything that we fear is because we believe God is not all that we claim it to be. He says we fear death because the belief in eternal life isn't true. You know, I touch on that often, how some of us think that death is the worst thing that could possibly happen to us. And I understand it. And we get up every day and we do everything we can to get the most out of this life. We try to enjoy it to the fullest. But knowing that there's something more, knowing and trusting and believing that there's something greater does not keep us from getting all that we can get while we're here. It just takes away that fear, that uncertainty, that something bad is going to happen to us one day, when in truth, something's good is happening to us every day and will continue to happen every day if you're here, and every day if you're not. If you have faith in God, you have nothing to fear. If you have faith as God, fear has no existence in your life. All there is and all there ever will be is a spiritual substance waiting to be formed. All there is a law that must work in compliance with our demand. Ernest Holmes goes on to tell us, he says, pure faith is a spiritual conviction. It is the acquiescence of the mind and body of an idea and an acceptance of a concept. He says, in faith, we celebrate the reality that under divine law, there are no limitations. And then Reverend Lisa reminded us that in Psalms 89, it tells us, with thy mouth, I will make known the faithfulness to all generations. And then in Psalms 90, she says, it speaks of an everlasting God. And it follows in 91 and tells us to abide under the shadow of the divine, and no evil will befall you. Now, she didn't mean that nothing bad will ever happen. What she meant was, when you recognize, when you unify and you realize your relationship with God, you can celebrate the divine no matter what happens. And then she went to Psalms 92 that confirms it's a good thing to celebrate the divine. And then here comes Reverend Paul, who brought us some food for the mind. He told us to celebrate the divine, we must know our truth. We should baptize ourselves from all our material problems. He said when we embrace the spiritual essence of God, we acknowledge a power that is always on full blast. You see, we can't disconnect from it, but we can choose how we use it, wrongly or rightly. We can temporarily deactivate it by our limited thinking, he says, but when we cease believing as a child of God, when we lose that childlike faith and innocence, that's when we become aware of our limitations. He said our blessings aren't limited by our circumstances. I really like when he dropped this nugget. I'm going to say it one more time. He said our blessings aren't limited by our circumstances. We allow our circumstances to limit our blessings. He told us that faith is a natural substance and fear is a learned behavior. What came out of the womb was an infant that was trusting and believing. But then we grew tall enough to pick from a tree of duality thinking. And then he touched on Psalm 67, 5-7, that says, the more we celebrate the divine, the more we demonstrate our faith, the more we speak our word and hold a vision of our desire, the higher our level of consciousness. The more God will increase our hearts. And then the master teacher showed up, Dr. Ronnie Jones. And he said, celebrating the divine starts by honoring the oneness of God and our connection with all that there is. Celebrate a power that lives, moves, and has its being within you, he said. Celebrate an idea that has no beginning or no ending. He says, when we celebrate the divine, we are simply celebrating ourselves. When you reunite with a power and presence, we become the love and the light of its essence. The celebration starts when we gain the understanding of our purpose. He quoted Neville, who said, the ultimate satisfaction is knowledge and understanding of a principle that you can explain as the truth of your being. He expressed that, like most of us, we now celebrate the divine based on an expanded spiritual perspective that was ignited by our understanding of religious science. You see, like Dr. Ronnie, early in my teaching, when I first went to Founders, all of my traditional faith believers and many members of my family told me that if I went to that church, it was going to pull me away from Jesus. And what happened for me and what happened for Dr. Ronnie, coming from that traditional church experience as well, the metaphysical understanding received brought me closer to Christ, made me want to be more like Jesus. And when I came to LA Third as Minister Jerrold, I shied away from that reverend label. And the reason I shied away from that label, I had been tainted by the knowledge of so many hypocritical preachers. I assumed that if I put reverend in front of my name, that people would think I'm one of those my way is the only way type of preachers. But it was Dr. Ronnie Jones who told me to let my life define the moniker, not the moniker define your life. So today, as Reverend Jerrold, I've retired from everything else. My ministry is my only job. Everything I do is in celebration of the divine. I'm Reverend Jerrold when I speak on Sunday. I'm Reverend Jerrold when I do addiction counseling on Monday and Tuesday. I'm Reverend Jerrold, the life coach, Wednesday through Friday. I'll be Reverend Jerrold, the life coach, addiction counselor, when I host my new radio show, Urban Family Focus, that starts this coming Saturday at 7 a.m. on KBLA 1580 AM, Tavis Smiley's new talk station. There were some that questioned if I should use the moniker Reverend Jerrold on radio. And I had to explain to them that as Reverend Jerrold, I don't celebrate an exclusive deity. I celebrate a universal deity. I honor and respect all religions and encourage every desire that doesn't harm or impede someone else. I don't care what your race is. I don't care what your gender preference is. I don't care what name of God you use. I believe your race is the color of your consciousness. I believe your gender is defined by the unconditional love you express. And I believe your religion is how you live, not what you call yourself or what deity you claim. I believe that you can be morally right, yet spiritually wrong. My only purpose is to celebrate the divine by enhancing my life, enhancing the lives of others, physically, mentally, and spiritually. The job doesn't pay a lot, but the rewards are unmeasurable. It is the expanded understanding gained from this teaching that expanded mind expands all of our opportunity to celebrate the divine within. As Reverend Lisa suggested, I took time to make a metaphysical observation of some of the passages in the book of Psalms. I looked at Psalms number 30, which tells us that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. It tells us when truth is hidden by fear and doubt, you're blind to your truth. You're blind and feel uncertain. But when you let our light shine, when you stand on faith, the unseen will manifest as perfection and as your blessing. And then Psalms 35:9 says, my soul shall be joyful in God, and that we shall rejoice in his salvation. It tells us when the ideas I possess bring joy to myself and others, I celebrate freedom from all limitations. Psalms 43:4 says, I will go before the altar of God. God makes me joyful with youthfulness, and upon the harp I will praise thee. You see, the altar is where we go to give up the lower in exchange for the higher. The altar is where we go to recall our childlike faith. And when we get there, we play the instrument of spiritual healing, which is the harp. And then Psalms 48:1-2 says, great is the Lord, exalt his city and his mountains. It tells us that it's a beautiful situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the slopes of the north, and the city of the great King. This scripture tells us that the law of God controls all, that we must celebrate our spiritual center, and we must achieve a higher state of mind. It's our high holy thoughts. The higher the consciousness, the more beautiful our situation. And then I looked at Psalms 106, which somewhat summarizes what it means by praising Jehovah, praising the Lord, giving thanks to God, and celebrating the divine. You know, there's some theologians that give credit to David as the writer for Psalms 106, but it's apparent that the narrative in this psalm is reflecting the journey of Moses. I'm gonna read 1-12. Bear with me. You know, I got a Fremont education. Sometimes it takes me a minute. Praise the Lord. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Who can utter the mighty acts of the Lord? Who can show forth his praise? Blessed are they that keep his judgments, and they that do righteousness at all times. Remember us, O Lord, with the favor of thou bearest of thy people. O visit us, thy salvation, that we may see the good of thy chosen, that we may rejoice in the day of joy and be glorified with thine inheritance. We may have sinned with our fathers. We may have committed inequity. We may have done wickedly. But our fathers understood not their wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea and even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for his name's sake, and they might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up, and he led them through the depths as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the hand of the enemy and delivered them from the hand of the oppressor. And the waters covered their enemies, and there was not one of them left. Then believed they his words, and they sang his praises. This psalm is telling us to celebrate the divine, is to acknowledge God as the ever-present I am, the quickening, healing, prospering power. It's telling us to give thanks and honor him. It's confirming divine law of our being. He says sometimes we lose sight of our healing. Sometimes we lose sight of that prospering power. And man gives its power and its thoughts to materiality. He becomes absorbed in effects. He becomes controlled by physical expression, property, and possession. He loses sight of the truth of his being. He becomes negative, a little fearful, and gives in to material conditions. But having lost consciousness connection with that healing, faith-giving life, that purifying fire of spirit, he has formed his body out of the substance of his material thoughts. And these thoughts, including negative and watery and limited subconscious beliefs, begin to show forth in the body as weakness of function or conditions contrary to the nature of the divine. That Psalms tells us that we must eliminate the belief that there is a power in things or conditions apart from the God consciousness. That we can acknowledge the healing, purifying presence of God through the Christ consciousness demonstrated by Jesus. You see, Jesus taught it's our inner realization of the renewing, transforming life of God that manifests health in our strength. It tells us by daily prayer, by aligning our thoughts with God, by speaking words of truth, by confirming and conforming to divine law that reveals our spiritual truth. That psalm is saying by praising Jehovah, by giving thanks to God, in celebrating the divine, we position our mind, our body, and our soul to receive a blessing, to experience the Lord's justice and demonstrate our righteousness at all times. When we celebrate the divine, the Christ nature we express is what saves us from our eternal oppressors. When we celebrate the divine, we cross the Red Sea of universal thought. All our material race thoughts must be drowned by our spiritual, progressive soul. Then our faith and belief will exalt the divine presence within you. As Ernest Holmes says, there is an inseparable relationship between faith, belief, and prayer. You see, this faith that Reverend Lisa pointed us to, these Psalms that she instructed us to read, they all get back to one thing. It all starts with a thought, and that thought has to be generated first by prayer. Prayer is a mental approach to the reality. Faith is the affirmation of our intention, and belief is the confirmation of the idea. God's truth is the only reality. Everything we do must be inspired by a thought, then seated and supported by a word spoken in faith, and then believed in, Ernest Holmes says. Prayer is the key that unlocks the spiritual power and gives it shape as our desired good. Ernest Holmes goes on to say that prayer is essential, not for salvation of the soul, because the soul is never lost, but for the conscious well-being of the soul that does not understand itself. The soul being ever present and never lost, but yet it makes no decisions. It only goes where we tell it to go. The directions come from our conscious thought. That's why the Bible tells us it's prayer that changes things, and thoughts are the things that it changes. It doesn't change the circumstance, but it changes our idea about it. Prayer doesn't change you. We celebrate an image that is perfect and changeless when we pray. Prayer changes our perception, our relationship with spirit. Prayer allows us to celebrate the God within ourselves. But our celebration must include communing with pure spiritual ideas, with a heart absence from sense desires. We always say we have to pray without ceasing. We always have to be thinking pure thoughts that keep our body free from sensual motivations. Recognition of that changeless power that can overcome all obstacles can happen through prayer and faith believed in. Ernest Holmes says, if you have great faith, you have great power. And through the power of imagination and the assurance of that faith, whatever formed in thought believed in will manifest in your life. We must celebrate the fact that whatever we ask in prayer is already answered. When we celebrate the divine, we become keenly aware that prayers have a healing power based on the unity with that all-knowing presence inside of us that we celebrate. Prayers don't have to be forced to compel or forced to work. Prayer simply requires a conscious recognition that health, abundance, and happiness has always been yours. Prayers don't deny our connection, they simply focus on our perfection. The longer we look at the problem, the longer it will take for us to overcome it. By praying for yourself and by praying for someone else, we must declare the truth of our being. We must compare the word of life as spoken by Jesus. Prayers are surrendered to this changeless law that we celebrate all this month. Ernest Holmes goes on to tell us we cannot demonstrate beyond our ability to mentally embody an idea. Our demonstration solely depends on our belief, our acceptance, and our willingness to comply with the law from which all good comes. There is no demonstration. Prayer is held captive by our thoughts if our thoughts are contrary to the nature of God. You see, a prayer believed in, a prayer grounded in faith, a prayer demonstrated in love, a prayer that asks for wisdom and understanding is answered while it's being uttered aloud, or it's answered whether it's given in silent contemplation. Ernest Holmes says this, he says in this chapter on faith, when intuitive knowing and faith are properly aligned with the divine, law of life can be celebrated because there is no limitations. He tells us when we have faith and we align ourselves with that power within us, that miraculous things become a normal occurrence. He says we must acquire and celebrate the faith of God, not just faith in God. Our thoughts must be centered always in universal mind. In celebrating the divine, we celebrate the knowledge and experience that produces our faith. So no matter what the appearance, we must always celebrate, we must always praise, we must always give thanks to the goodness of God. When we celebrate the divine, we know in whom we believe. Our God and our Christ that moves and lives and has its being within each and every one of us. I'm going to close by leaving you with some words from someone you guys know I like, Gibran. And it's just part of what he has to say about faith and what he has to say about prayer. He says, I can teach you how to pray in words. God listens not to your words, save when he himself utters them through your lips. I cannot teach you the prayer of the seas and of the forests and of the mountains. But you and I are born of the mountains and the forests and the seas, and can find their prayer in your hearts. And if you but listen in the stillness of the night, you shall hear them saying in silence, O God, who are our winged self? It is thy will in us that willeth. It is thy desire in us that desireth. It is the urge in us that would turn our nights, which are thine, into days, which are also thine. We cannot ask thee for aught, but for thou knowest our needs before they are born to us. We have spent all month celebrating the divine. We have learned as much as we can absorb and embody of how important faith is to that celebration experience. Now we know that it all starts with a word spoken, that it all starts with an idea conceived. It all starts with an action put in motion. It all starts when we plant that positive seed in that divine soul that embraces that warm heart and produces that which we desire, that allows us to celebrate the divine that's within us. I gave you all I have. I can't give you any more. All I can say to you is, get up every day. Take a deep breath. Inhale. Hold it for 7 seconds and exhale as you release it for 7 seconds. And say to yourself, this day, I am going to celebrate the divine within me. And everybody I see, everybody I talk to, everybody that experiences me on this day will know that I am rejoicing in God. God bless you. Have a wonderful Sunday.